All right, I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the meeting of the Finance and Facilities Committee for the School District of Waukesha. It's August 8th, 2022. Well, welcome everyone. Appreciate you coming out on a summer's evening here and fantastic weather. This is a nice break that we have from the hot stuff, hot and muggy. So thanks for being here tonight. Have we been properly posted?
Yes, we have.
I appreciate that. And we do have time of the meeting right now for public comment. And we do have one person that has signed up tonight. And because there's 6 speakers or less, at the 3-minute mark, we'll notify you, Lindsay, and give you up to 5 minutes total tonight. We expect all speakers to honor our time limit, refrain from using any inappropriate language, and be respectful in their comments. Speakers who do not meet these expectations may be prohibited from speaking at future board and committee meetings. Speakers are here to address the board, not the audience. The school board and the committee in this case does not endorse any comments made by members of the community here tonight. We'd like to remind our community members of the impact of their words on others and that our children are watching. We commit to communicating with you in a respectful and productive manner and ask that you do the same. We also expect that the audience will be respectful of the speaker and the board and refrain from responding with verbal comments, cheering, applause, and other behavior that will detract from the meeting. And please note that no obstructions can be created between the board and the audience. Visual aids cannot be used, and the area behind the speaker and podium will be clear during the public comment. Also, in order to respect our speakers and meeting participants, please silence your cell phones if you haven't done so already. And our speaker this evening is Lindsay Fleck. Welcome, Lindsay.
Thank you so much. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you at this meeting. I'm always grateful for the opportunity I have to make my voice heard here. I know that all of you most likely have a great deal more training in finance and facility management than I'm ever going to have, and thank goodness for that. I also know, though, that I have watched very smart people with a lot of experience and a lot of training spend a lot of money on things that do not result in significant changes for students, families, schools, and communities. I honestly believe that almost all of these people have done this with the very best of intentions. And I have learned in my life through my experiences and my past, current, and I'm sure future mistakes, that there's often a significant gap between our intention and our outcome. I want to respectfully request that you take pause for as long as you need to think about what makes the difference for students, families, school staff, and communities. Is it higher pay for teachers? Is it more and newer resources and curricula? Is it more instructional coaches? Newer buildings, newer furniture? Knowing that wherever you go, everything is going to be done the same way. Does the answer to these questions change if these items are used as a leverage to control or exert power over teacher and student behavior? Does it change if it marginalizes individuals or groups, or if it relies on large hierarchies and power structures that make change slow and difficult and that place teachers and students at the bottom of the power hierarchy? Is the difference instead in feeling trusted to support students to be successful, in giving autonomy to students and teachers to use their strengths to move toward better outcomes? Is it improved mental health for teachers and students, increased teacher retention, increased student retention, increased achievement, engagement, and confidence for teachers and students? I ask this not because I think that you wouldn't answer that way, but I think that at times we as a district are making decisions about our time, our money, and our resources that focus on improving the observables or the things that we have control over, rather than on making the Waukesha experience better and richer for the people who are a part of it. I don't think Waukesha is the only community doing that. In fact, I think it's right in line with the norm of what I see most school districts, particularly school districts in larger cities, doing. Another norm among those districts is stalled achievement and mental health outcomes that are very negative. And I don't want to look like that. This is my community. It's the only community that my family calls home. And I'm asking for this community to make a choice to look at things differently than we have before. Doing what other districts and communities are doing is very unlikely to work, not only because we are an entirely different district and community, but because oftentimes what they are doing isn't even working well for their communities. I am asking you, please, in all of your considerations and decisions, to ask as many questions as you have until they're all exhausted. To hold at the heart of your purpose what is best for students, staff, and the community as a whole, not what's been done before, and to think differently about how we move forward. Waukesha and public education as a whole really needs us to do this if we want to change outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Okay, moving on to our action items. But before I get started on the action items, just so you know, we're going to move the discussion item for referendum debt. We're going to move that to item 3.5. So we'll have 3 action items. We'll insert a discussion item, and then we'll go back to the action items. So tonight we're going to start, our first action item is approval of minutes from the July 11th meeting. Do I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
Second? Is there any discussion or changes on that? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And I'll abstain because I wasn't at the meeting. So 301, Jess or Darren? Moving on to approval of our vouchers. Did we have any questions, Heather?
Yes. Thank you. Yes, we did have some questions this week. Carrie provided quite a few that I was able to answer and get back via email, but many of them were larger items. So for instance, Overdrive Incorporated, there was a $12,000 charge. The details and who approves, that's under Steve Schloman's ownership, and he stated that Overdrive is an e-book software system for purchasing and managing e-books in the libraries, part of the Common School funds. Class Technologies, $16,325. The question was, is it an annual fee? Jason Smith is over that. That's part of eAchieve. He stated that this is a replacement for Blackboard Collaborate, and it's a new web conferencing platform for their live sessions with their students. It's a bit higher this year due to the new adoption, and the annual fee will be similar to Blackboard was in the past.
We'll take, Heather, we'll pause in between each one just to see if there's any other questions or discussion on those. So we'll take these first 2.
Perfect.
Do we have any other questions or discussion on those? Okay. Go ahead, Heather.
Mr. Como.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. We may just want to hold, I don't know if I think there's a category of things that are related to apps specifically. I have some questions around that. I don't know if there were other questions that were raised about apps as well. I noticed Brain Pop was on the list as well.
Brain Pop was on there, yes.
Okay, maybe we could talk about those all together.
Sure, that would be fine. It would be
I want to
fine.
give a chance to just.
I don't know what that list is. Yes, Carrie.
When I go through and review the vouchers, I usually pick a theme or a dollar amount. So the kind of the approach that I took is I really wanted to take a look at spending that was surrounding around libraries, books, and apps. So all of these vouchers are surrounded within that common theme.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, we'll make sure that we dialogue and get all our questions out, whether they're lumped together or pieces. Sounds like, did you have any other questions besides the ones that Carrie had submitted?
Yes, from Joe. There was a question about P-cards and how that transacts when someone is leaving the district, for instance. I was told Jess is in charge of the P-cards, and she stated that when a principal is leaving the district, the P-card's deactivated approximately 2 weeks prior to the last contracted day. That allows the last few transactions to be uploaded to Skyward and approved for payment prior to that person's leaving the actual district.
Okay, I appreciate understanding that process. I was sure that we would deactivate it, but when? And, I thought that was an important thing for us to understand, and I saw a number of charges being brought through
Yes.
by someone who I knew was moving on to another position outside of the district, so I appreciate that.
There was actually a question at the last board meeting about just our approval processes, and P cards was part of that. I'm planning on bringing that back. Hopefully Sherry's back, and we can talk about that in September. Just on that theme of processes and approvals and procedures, so.
Yeah, I mean, when we started the P card, there were just a few charges, right, when we were testing it out, and I think it's gained momentum, and I think there's some good positives to the P card, so, going over maybe why we also went to that, Darren, that might be part of your presentation, so.
Yeah, we can bring that back.
Okay. All right. Any other questions on the P card? Heather?
Okay, we also had Brightly Software, and the question was, what is it and who approves it? This is under Steve's ownership again. It was formerly known as School Dude, so it's used for the buildings and ground tracking inventory, preventative maintenance, and work orders.
Okay.
Skyward, that is under Steve's ownership as well, and that, of course, is our financial system. NWEA, that's under Steve's ownership. It's an online assessment organization that provides us student map testing. This comes out of the assessment budget and would have been approved by Amy Riebel, who's now Jen Jennerman.
What's the acronym stand for? NWEA?
I am not certain. Sorry, I can get that to you.
We can send that out in an email
yeah.
or the Friday update.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm not.
Follett School Solutions, under Steve's ownership as well. It's the Destiny Library Management Software that manages book inventory and checkout at all schools. It's relating to common school funds as well. Brain Pop, which was mentioned earlier, it's an interactive online website app that provides written, audio, and video content that allows students to research topics through the common school funds again, and that's under Steve's ownership as well. Blackboard, the question was, is this an annual fee? It's under Steve's ownership, and this is our learning management software. It's used to manage content and curriculum in the classrooms.
Can you clarify, then it is an annual fee?
He did not specifically say, I would say yes, but I can double check on that one.
We could send follow-up information on that,
Yep.
too. This time of year, I would think it would be.
Then we had two from Asset Works Risk Management, one for $29,000, one for $425. Joe Cook is the owner of these. Asset Works is a parent company of Oasis, the main software we use for special ed IEPs and 504 plans.
We've been using, go ahead, I'm sorry.
And so that's where the $29,000 comes in, and then the $425 invoice was for a custom form used for the 504 plans.
Yeah, Oasis, that's been in our bailiwick for a long time. I'm going to say even when we had our programs at Harvey Phillip building, we were using Oasis back then, so it's been around a long time. I think it's been tried and true.
We hired their developer when they went out of business
Oh,
to keep it running.
gotcha.
And
I didn't realize that.
one last item, American Reading Company. This was $24,959.28, and it actually had to do, the questions were, did we get a proposal? Is this a pilot? And who approves this? This actually, the information I received was that this is Benchmark. It's a new writing workshop program for kindergarten through fifth. It deals with learning loss, and it was approved in 21-22 using ESSER 3 funds. And my understanding of the approval process was that it was through FNF and the Board of Education.
Okay.
That one was actually through TNL. So we did go through a formal review and approval just a few months ago.
Okay. That's all I have.
Appreciate that, Heather. Yeah, Dr. Siebert.
I can just help with NWEA. This is the Northwest Evaluation Association, and they are the creators of the MAP, which is the Measure of Academic Progress test.
Right. Gotcha.
We do that 3 times a year
Okay.
as a form of assessment.
Yeah, and we've been using MAP for quite a long time also. I just didn't know who authored it. So, okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate those details, Heather. Are there other questions on those? Yes, Dr. Piasek.
I do, I guess the question better than a comment. Would it be possible for us to see those recurring app-related expenses? And it sounds like we see a lot of them in June, July, August timeframe. I think this is where it's difficult to get a full picture of what the investment is in the iPad resources. And Mr. Schloman has done a great job of giving context to what that investment looks like. But I think as some of these apps come in, in some cases, we use the Common School Fund for that because they're replacing library materials. In other cases, I think we're using other operational dollars to pay for those apps. Some, I believe, are linked to, for example, our eAchieve contract. So there's some commitment to having these types of platforms and applications, so they may be kind of embedded in that business relationship. But I think that might help mitigate some of the extra questions when they just kind of pop up as individual line items. I don't know if there's even a purchasing category that's associated with those types of digital applications that would help us filter a little bit better.
I think accounting-wise, we probably follow it pretty good, and then with what Steve can bring to the conversation just off the top of his head, I think we could gather a pretty comprehensive report for you. Steve's actually watching. Blackboard is an annual fee. So we're down to one voucher question that we need to follow up on, so,
Hey, Steve.
yeah.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
Where are you in the cloud?
Thank you.
No, really, we do appreciate it. Yes, Carrie.
So I just wanted to follow up, kind of along with Dr. Piasek, but it is hard as a board, especially when we're talking about the curriculum of things that we're looking to improve and enhance and use for our academic achievement. When we see items that are coming through, such as library tools, such as apps on the pads that all have an impact on the curriculum, it's hard to see the balance as it comes through F&F versus where we've seen this as a approval item within T&L. And I think that's a gap for me that I need to get filled, is that these types of discussions really need to be coming through the T&L as well before I see a purchase outlay. And I don't know if that has been done specifically with some of these, but I would have liked to have seen the library focus and the apps and things that are used as a resource for our academic program be discussed prior to being paid for. I don't know how to change or navigate that a different way, but I feel like we do get a point where T&L is talking about pieces of it, but not all. We see the back end on F&F, and then we're kind of left we have to find a way to match those, especially as they're being used strongly for resources for our kids.
So that would, I think what you're asking is how we report out on this. How would we keep track of this? So you're asking to have essentially everything for curriculum instruction be kind of like the major category, and then perhaps broken down within that.
Yes and no. I look at a lot of the T&L meetings where we are sitting here talking about the books and the resources and the guides. Many of these things that just approved on vouchers are items that I would have liked to discuss as to use resources, why we're doing it, and I agree. Having a recurring annual notice of here's the programs that we have, they've already been approved in the past, and being prepared for them, Brain Pop for me is one of those that seems like it's flying under the radar. We're renewing it. Our children are using it significantly as a resource for academics, but yet I don't see it come through as an approval for, or a voucher that we are saying, what is that tool used for? Is it vetted? Is it approved? Is it good? Or is it just coming through F&F as an already approved app that we sponsor?
Mr. Clark?
I do think in the past, a lot of these things have just kind of rolled forward and we've renewed, but as we've talked more and I guess for some of us learn to work together, we're willing to change in the business office. If the board identifies certain areas that you want us to be more able to track on my side of things, or if the budget calendar that we work through needs to be extended a little bit so you have that time to get in front of the voucher, right? We're more than willing to, as long as we know the questions, we can work on getting the solutions, or at least trying to find a better solution.
Yeah, and actually over the years, we've had times where we've talked about accounting at the programmatic level. And maybe that's really what you're leaning towards. This might be something that what we can do, Darren, is bounce this around a little bit in terms of what could be the potentially different ways. There's project accounting that works in some cases, not in all cases. There's program accounting. It might just be some different ways to take the data that we have, slice and dice. It might need some recategorization, not sure, but I think what we probably ought to do is brainstorm a little bit on that first. If there's ideas that you want to present to, that you've seen perhaps that have worked in your organizations, I caution you a little bit. We can't always take business ideas and apply them to the world of education, but in this case, we might very well be able to. I think accounting is one of those areas that we can align pretty well, business and education, but there are some differences also with some of the statutes that drive education. Yes, Mrs. Kozlowski.
Sorry, just follow up. I'm not asking accounting to redo the wheel. What I'm asking for us is to understand ahead of a payment cycle what the approvals are, and are we doing adequate review of programs, apps, curriculum spend ahead of before accounting sees it. So in any business that I've been part of, accounting is usually the last one to see it, first one to understand and be able to map it, but it falls at the very bottom where things have already occurred and happened. I'm asking for some of these items that are related specifically to libraries or curriculum, that the approval process has a different layer in there, that there's another level of oversight or review before approval that then lands in accounting.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If just thinking off the top of my head, if the board can identify the core areas you want to look at, we can come up with a process to make that happen. And I agree with your accounting statement. If you say, how much should we spend on something next year, we might be able to identify that easier for you and say, some things get coded out to the schools, some things the central department, but so we can, if there's areas we know that the board's going to want to have answers on the next year or 2 years down the road, maybe we bring that centrally or we work on the account structure or something. So we're willing to do that as well.
Yes, Pat.
So, Carrie, just so I know what you're talking about, are you concerned that we are just automatically renewing these things without any sort of vetting from TNL?
Yes.
Yes, that's what it is. That's, okay, I just want to make sure. When do the July vouchers get paid? Because are we approving stuff that's already been paid?
Most checks are released.
Yeah, there's gone. So you would have to look at that at TNL
In May.
in May, well before this discussion that we're having right now. And I totally understand what you're saying, because we have a lot of apps that we approved when I was the head, because when I ran TNL, we did a lot of technology. That's when, Waukesha One was coming on, and there is a ton of apps that we approve, and then we would get updates, like if something would come up, or there was a huge price increase, then we would revet them and decide. But there's a lot that doesn't get revetted, and that's going to have to be done at least 2 months before we see the vouchers.
I think.
Yeah.
And we actually had coined that as, I believe back then, when we started Waukesha One, we had that as, we coined it as a project, not a program. So that's what I was trying to get at is, and I know the accounting happens afterwards, but it's the organizational aspect. Project accounting, that was an example of keeping track of that, was just coined a project. So any of the projects that we believe are big and important, we should be, approving ahead of time, as you're saying, knowing what those expenses are. And so it's not like we haven't done that, but maybe not as comprehensive as what you're looking for here. More routine things, not one-off projects, and that's where I was starting to say, well, maybe we need to take a look more at a programmatic level. So there's really a couple different things. Making sure that we understand ahead of time what's going on, and then are we tracking it properly, and what does the budget versus the actual look like? So there's a number of layers there.
So the best thing to do would be to get a list of the apps that we have and a renewal date, which is easily pulled. Steve can pull that quick, because he has a list of all the apps that are allowed on the iPads. So, and he can kill the apps that aren't supposed to be on the iPads and leave the ones that are supposed to when you enter the building, when you log in. So I think it would be pretty easy for Steve just to pull that list of apps, and the renewal date's got to be in Skyward, right?
I'm sure he has.
It's in there, so it would be a pretty simple thing to pull. And then you would just have to revet that stuff 2 months before the renewal date. So I think that would be
The only thing
pretty simple.
that I would ask as administration is that the board have shared areas of interest, and not that we can't, but we can't be easily chasing 15 areas or 20 areas of, so if we have some key areas that you want to focus on in a fiscal year or something to kind of frame it up a little bit rather than, or what's the process? Is it just one board member saying, I want to track this and that? And I just want to know what the goal, the shared goal is rather than, and not that any board member can't ask me a question anytime, because I'm more than willing to do that, but it can become a lot of work as well, so.
Dr. Piasek?
Thank you. I think the finance side of this, when I say this, I mean the iPad and all of its goodies, becomes much easier when we have an earlier TNL conversation about what's all included in the package. And I think that's something that we've all been kind of inching toward. So not trying to interrupt the program, but having maybe an annual check-in on what all is the iPad program involving and what apps are on it, and are we aware of what the costs are associated with all those? So then when we get to this point, it's not a question of should we have purchased that app or not. It's a question of, okay, that one's in the program, and we'll continue with it. Because I would be the first to acknowledge that there is significant cost savings in having digital content on our iPads, but I think all of that needs to be looked at cohesively, and I would probably propose that we do that once a year when we get through the school year and we have an opportunity to anticipate what's coming. I don't think it's efficient to be doing this month to month at TNL and then pushing that forward to F&F. I just don't think that's practical, but I think looking at it at least once a year might make sense.
Okay.
That's just my opinion. I don't
Well,
know.
let us.
No, I would
I'll
agree
talk-
with that, but the renewal date's key, though. So if we have renewal
question.
dates in the beginning, in the middle of the years,
Yeah.
definitely going to have to look at that app.
I can tell you our administrative infrastructure, our Skyward or our school dude, that runs on a fiscal year. You get into the individual apps, someone might have loaded it on January 2nd or, but let me talk with Steve, he's listening, but about what would be the best timing of that review, and get the list and all of that, and then we'll report back either here or or maybe in T&L, whichever you think's a better avenue.
I see some heads nodding. That's looking like there's some, at least general consensus there. Okay, fantastic. I'd be looking for a motion on approving the vouchers for this last month.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you, Heather, for your input there, and a little bit of homework that Darren and Steve will have, and come back hopefully with some good ideas. Thank you. Moving on to our next action item, we're looking at some heating, ventilation, and air conditioning improvements. And really the first step is coming up with a plan, and we would like to talk a little bit on that this night and maybe even get approval to move forward with a plan. And Darren, do you want to introduce our guests tonight?
Yeah, Kirk Wiebelhaus is here from Building Solutions. Joe and Kyle are from our maintenance department, and they've been here the last several months talking about this topic. So as we discussed last month, we went ahead and issued an RFP for the engineering services related to any HVAC work that we might proceed with. And again, the process would be, you do this work, then we would like to hire a mechanical engineer, or is engineer the right term? Thank you. To do an RFP to find that person, and then have it kind of be a shared planning process, and we think we come up with a more efficient final product for everybody. So tonight we have the results of the RFP for engineering attached in board docs. We had 3 respondents. 2 firms chose not to. One firm chose not to respond that we actually reached out with. They did a lot of the referendum work. Ring and Do responded. They did the actual HVAC study that started the analysis. IBC and RTM. We're recommending RTM, and you can see the financial part of it in the attachment. Be about $180,000 of work before we go forward. Within those results, you can see in the left-hand column the areas of work that we think will be part of phase 1. But I want to stress, once this engineering work begins, you have some schools, especially those with the June air heating systems, that we're going to see what, I guess, the return on investment would be, because it gets to be a little more complicated because you're switching the entire system around. And do you spend a lot more money in one school where you could maybe do 2 or 3 other units? And we'd have to go through some evaluation such as that. So we hope to have the RFP sent out this month for the mechanical side of this, and then once a final, and that would get your approval, and once the final design is done, we would send out an RFP for the actual equipment and or materials, and then come back to the board and say, okay, all in, it's, we think $5.5 to $6 million, we're guessing, would be the total spend. So that's the process we're looking to proceed with. I wanted everyone to come in tonight in case you had any questions on any, either the upgrades we're looking to do, or anything about the firm that we're recommending, or the process in selecting that firm. We're here to respond to any questions. I don't know if you guys have anything in particular you want to add.
Not from my standpoint. Yeah, really, in the RFP, so first of all, it's good to be back in front of this committee again. It's been a while.
Yes.
I helped with the referendum.
Welcome back, Kurt.
People that haven't been on the committee prior to that, but my name's Kurt Wiebelhaus. In putting the RFP together, helping the district draft that HVAC RFP, the first step, as Darren said, was to take that Ring and Do report that has been layered the additional information on, as far as that report that was done a year and a half ago or so, and develop the priorities. So we put that out in the RFP to solicit the interest of the firms, and really outline the process, I like to, when I put the RFPs together, I like to give those firms that are looking at the project as much information as possible, to really outline that process that we've been going through. And that first piece was kind of that low-hanging fruit that we did as part of the ring and do report a year and a half ago, was we took care of the duct cleaning, we took care of the coil cleaning, we took care of the outside air balancing, and the filtration. That work will be complete within this next month here. So that work has been done. This next portion that this RFP was putting together was to really execute that next phase of that ring and do report that we used to guide us, along with the additional input that we had from the internally, which also layered in cooling controls upgrades as well, and then prioritize. So as Darren said, this first phase that these engineers responded to was the highest of the priorities that we isolated. And as you'll see with the RTM at the 179, they came in pretty, compared to the others, they came in pretty aggressive. And you know, a couple of those factors, as I talked to the other firms, I think one of the ones was these engineers have work yet, which is, I guess, a good sign yet. And so they weren't real hungry. And I think the other aspect of it is it's a complex project. These projects going into the existing buildings is a complex project, and that's why I think we've had so many touch points with this committee. Just to bring you along the process, because it's not a black and white, do this project and come back in a year and tell us how it is. It's kind of that whole process. So that's the way the RFP was set up, was to walk through that process to make sure we're managing the risk for the district and getting a good result at the end. So the other piece that with the structure of it, bringing the engineer on, which is what's recommended for tonight, and then that next step beyond this is to bring on a design assist contractor. And so that'll be the second question for this group is are we prepared to take that next step of putting an RFP out for the design assist contractor? So you have the design engineer that will be putting the engineering behind it, and the design assist contractor, then we would put an RFP out similar to what we did with a construction manager, where we put it out on their fees and their general conditions, basically the cost to manage that project. And then when those responses come back, we'll evaluate off of that. So if the direction is to proceed with that, we would do that this next month. And then the benefit of that, with the environment that we're in and with the complexity of this job, the benefit of doing it that way is, one, the contractor is often the one that's finding the challenges in the ceiling or whatnot. So he's able to do that work ahead of time as the design is going forward. So that's why this fit on this type of a project. I don't always recommend that method, but with this type of project, I felt like it was an appropriate way. And the other big factor as well, why I'm recommending the design assist approach, is with our supply chain environment. I had a project this last week where, we ordered the stuff in December of last year with the idea of, okay, great, we'll be in good shape for start of school, right? Well, it's the latest update I got was it's leaving Minnesota on the 19th of August is what it's supposed to be, and we're going to be scrambling to get it in, right? So, and it does vary so much on the type of equipment, but the idea with the design assist, that also helps us with, as design is happening, the contractor's looking and trying to find those other challenges that the engineer may not find. And as soon as the actual product, the actual air handler unit, the VAVs, the controls, whatever it may be, is designed, and this committee is ready to go forward, that piece can be bid out, and then the PO released, right? So some of these, the more standard type units will have a quicker lead time. The custom units, we're crossing our fingers, but the idea is we want to keep this process going. And that was the one firm that decided not to respond was their concerns. They just didn't have the capacity at the time to keep moving with this schedule. So yeah, so ultimately, RTM is our recommendation. When we got the bids in, Darren, Joe, and Kyle and myself did a scope review with them to make sure we were comfortable with what they were proposing and their process. And pending the approval tonight, we will be doing a kickoff meeting later on this week so we can hit the ground running. And then, like I said, then the next piece, then if this committee so desires, I would get an RFP out for that design assist firm. Any questions on the process at all?
Just real quick, RTM, what's it stand for?
That's a great question. I can look that.
I asked Darren
RTM.
this weekend too.
Steve, you still listening?
Who are these people?
Phone a friend, or?
Yeah, right. So RTM, their main office is out of Joliet, Illinois, and they've recently come to the Brookfield area. I think this is where their office is now. It's a firm that myself and I don't think Waukesha has done work with RTM in the past, but they have done other school work. I came across them on another school project that I was involved with doing an RFP for. But I haven't had direct connection and worked with them in the past. The contact that we'd be working with lives in Oconomowoc, so he is local. But they have good references. They're backed by a large firm. They're a significant size firm out of Joliet, Illinois. It's just the Brookfield office isn't as large, but they have the support. I think they said when we asked them that question when we did our scope review with them, and I think it was 8 or 9 engineers in the Wisconsin area, so they have the capacity to do it. And the other benefit that takes having that design assist, again, I think also helps with that piece as well, that in this quick turnaround, having both the input from the contractor and the engineer helps with that as well.
I can see a big advantage to taking that approach. I appreciate you suggesting that, Kurt.
But I can look up RTM and find out what that name stands for.
Yeah, Pat.
Website just says RTM.
I think it's the founder's
I'm
initials.
assuming it's names.
Okay.
The founder's
Okay.
initials. It was founded in 81, Schaumburg.
Got it.
So been around a long time, well established. You said you ran into them with another project you were working on?
Yes, Racine School District, they had put a large RFP out for they have an $800 million worth of work in the next 8 years, and so they had put an RFP out, and I helped them with that project. So they were one of the firms that had responded, so that's where I came across them.
Well, you earned my respect, Kurt, with the work that you did for our referendum, the processes that you brought to the table, and helped us through in selecting our architects and so on and so forth. You did a really good job. So from my perspective, the proof is in the pudding, and I appreciate you taking a look at our district, where we're at, what the circumstances are, and maybe coming up with a process that you don't always recommend, but you think will work for us. So from my perspective, you've always been dead on when you've led us in a particular direction, and I truly appreciate that.
I appreciate those words. I could say my business, Building Solutions Owners Rep work, everything is built on the journey on a project and the results that come out of the project, and those are two key success factors, and that's what we try, making that journey for the district as smooth as possible, and also have financial results and the actual, the results of how that space performs on a project. So I appreciate you saying that.
Mm-hmm. So, do we want to move forward with the RFP process, I guess is the question.
And the approval of RTM.
Yeah, and the approval of RTM, yes. Sorry, a little more specific, yes. Be looking for either a motion or more discussion. Dr. Piasek.
Thank you. I would move to proceed with the RFP as presented.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
Second by Karen. Further discussion? Yes, Pat?
So, RTM is going to do the design work and tell us really what we need, right? And then from that, we're going to get the scope on what it's actually going to cost, right? That's how this is essentially working. They're going to design it to meet the needs of the buildings that we have. RTM is going to engineer the HVAC system, and then we're going to go and take that information, and people are going to bid out what RTM wants them to put in.
RTM along with the mechanical company as well.
Yeah, you're right.
So it'd be a step process, step.
So we started in this RFP, we gave them what our expected budget was for
Okay.
this Phase 1's Bethesda, Lowell, Prairie, Hillcrest, and Hawthorne.
Okay.
That budget came from, the starting point was the ring and do was they identified these are the units
Yep.
that are in the worst condition, right? So Waukesha, tons of lot of HVAC, right?
Yep.
We're in really good shape with the middle schools, because that work was done the last few years, right? But if you remember from the report, there was 93% of the HVAC units are past their ASHRAE life, the 20 to 25 years, right? But we're not going to try hitting all 93, because all 93% doesn't need to be addressed at this point. 28% is 2 times that life. So we started focusing in on that, and then so with this RFP, we indicated what that budget was, what we expected was. We got that budget by asking a contractor to just give us a budget of what this list of project would take. And now that we are kind of going from the higher level, now we're isolating down into the schools. It's RTM now is coming in and looking at those specific schools and within the budget that we have, and saying, okay, the air handler unit was the primary thing we identified. We also identified some controls in that unit, or in that building. It's not all the controls, or it's not all the units, it's just the ones that we identified. And so the back and forth that's going to be a challenge for the buildings and grounds side is to be looking at, okay, boy, it sure would be nice to be doing this as well. But we have a budget here, and we're trying to hit all these. So there's going to be some of those discussions that's going to, and that's what we're planning on reporting back as we get the design underway, the design assist contractors then updating their budgets, right? And saying, okay, we're over here, we're under here, we can still do these things. And the idea is to keep this group up to speed then and report back around November, December-ish is when we come back and say, okay, Phase 1, we were planning it to look like this. For this reason or this reason, massage that out. Maybe we took something from Phase 2 and we put into Phase 1, and here's our recommendation to write POs to this vendor and this vendor and this vendor. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. And we have to spend the $300,000 to keep moving forward in the RFP process, correct? We need that design.
Yeah.
Right, the ones. 180,000.
Oh.
Yep, $180,000 to proceed with the engineering side. Yep, to
Okay.
take that next step.
And then RTM is not a design build.
They are not.
They are not.
They're just.
Do they recommend certain equipment? And the reason I ask that is because we've run into that issue where we've had the company
Yeah.
recommend stuff that we
Something that
replaced.
supports them on the back end, and I
Yes,
I
that we
agree
had to
with-
replace
Yeah.
rather quickly.
Yep. No, they are not. They're completely independent. In
Okay.
fact, a question they already asked Joe is do you have recommended or desired equipment that you'd like to use? So Joe already provided that list of
Okay.
equipment
Okay.
to stay somewhat standard with the district, but also still have some competitiveness by having multiple manufacturers. So, no, they don't push one specific, but I agree with what you're going with.
Yeah, no,
where you're
for
going.
sure, 'cause we had that issue. And then
Yes.
and I'm sorry, the 300 is for Phase 2. We would go with them for Phase 2, right?
Yeah, so we have that pricing all together, and so
That's where I got
that
the
was all
300
competitively
number.
bid already, so yes, assuming we keep moving and everything's looking good, we'll be able to keep them on board for that next phase as well.
Excellent, thank you.
I think the nice thing about this approach is we're checking in with the board periodically, and actually it'll be several times this fall. The other thing that I forgot to mention, I included in another attachment is, how are we going to fund all of this if we proceed with a $6 million, ultimately what becomes a $6 million decision? I would suggest that we move ahead and fund it through the remaining balance of ESSER 1, and then, ESSER 2, and then ESSER 3 for the balance. And the reason I say that, my other recommendation would have been the general fund balance, but to me, I'd rather keep the dollars in the general fund balance because we have no time restraints. We have no rules to follow. There's plenty of reports out there about districts that aren't allocating the use of these funds, and I think this, it's been a while since I've read all the suggested areas to spend this money on, but making your buildings a safer place was certainly listed as one of those things, so I think it follows through with the intention of the legislation, so, but again, we're only making the $180,000 decision tonight, but just wanted to plant that seed, and I have it in there with blue lines on our balance sheet, and this is kind of our ESSER update as well. Is for us to come back, but just so you know what I'm thinking in terms of our approach to the funding of it.
And that's not part of the motion. We're not.
No, you're just approving the
Yeah,
$180,000.
I just want to be clear
Yep.
that
Yeah,
part
I
of
have
the
it
discussion
labeled-
just now is
I
not
have it
part of the
labeled
motion.
proposed in the handout as well, just so I'm not binding your hand.
We're just looking at moving forward with spending the $179,000 with RTM right now. That's essentially, it wasn't, the motion didn't include RTM, it was just the results of.
But I would look for the $180,000.
It's essentially the same thing.
And it's just.
But I'm looking for the $180,000 to come from ESSER 2.
From ESSER, which is as presented for your recommendation.
Yep.
Okay. But we were talking about $6 million in your discussion.
Right,
I just wanted to separate out,
Exactly.
what we were actually talking on this motion.
I
so.
think just, if I could, just for purposes of clarification, what I think Mr. Clark is clarifying is that those initial dollars for this work that is this active
The design fee.
motion right now would come from the ESSER 2.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Other questions or discussion? We're clear on the motion?
Crystal.
All right. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Passes 5-0. We're moving on to the next phase here. We appreciate it. We'll get moving with some of the design work here, and a lot to do in a short period of time, too. So we appreciate you keeping it moving along, gentlemen.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Have a good night.
So, as Joe mentioned earlier, we're moving referendum debt report up in front of the budget action items. I think it's a better timing or sequence. Michelle, can you?
Ms. Weiberg's with us tonight?
Yeah, Michelle, can you hear us? There she is.
Hi, Michelle.
Michelle. Can you?
Go ahead.
So we have, I just wanted to have Michelle check in because one conversation that we're going to have from the budget hearing essentially to final approval is the level of defeasance or prepayment of Fund 39 debt we may or may not want to do. So I thought it'd be good for her to come in tonight, just kind of I think it's going to be a very quick report, but just update everyone on where we stand as of today. The preliminary budget assumes that we are continuing defeasance at the same level we did the prior year, just so you know what our thinking is and what's before you on the next agenda item. So, Michelle, if you want to walk us through your report, that'd be fantastic.
You bet. I think I'm sharing my screen here. Everyone can see that. I hope. Okay, great.
We do have it in our packet. We don't.
I'll bring it up. I'm
Oh,
bringing it
okay.
up right now, too, on our screens.
Oh, okay. And as Sarah said, we've been looking at this on an annual basis really since the referendum passed in 2018, and we did the subsequent financings to fund those projects. So just to kind of give you an update on those referendum the goals that we had as we looked at the 2018 referendum. We projected, prior to the referendum financings actually being completed, we projected that the first phase of financing would come in at an interest rate of 3.25%, and that the second phase would come in at 3.5%. The actual interest rates were significantly lower than that. So the first phase of financing, which was for $45 million of the $60 million that was approved, came in at a rate of 2.08%. The second phase, which was for $15 million, came in at a rate of 2.10%. We subsequently refinanced that loan that was done with a bank and was prepayable at any time at an interest rate of 1.05%. And in just a few minutes, I will recap what the interest savings were as a result of that. So these lower interest rates certainly provided reduced interest costs, but also a lower projected tax impact, and gave us current and future prepayment flexibility, given the way that we designed the financing plan, so that as you addressed your levy in the years following the referendum financings for the collection year of 2021, 22, and then what you're contemplating for this current year levy that will be collected in 2023, you were able to levy funds in over what was due on the debt and use those funds to prepayment. And so your levy additional funds in 21 and 22 were approximately $5 million for that purpose. And the projection for 2023 would be, again, a little over $5 million in the debt service levy available for prepayment of the existing debt. So this is what remains of the referendum debt service. Again, there were two phases of the financing, one for $45 million, one for $15 million. The $15 million phase has been repaid in its entirety. So that loan is completely gone. And what remains is what you are looking here on the left-hand side of the page, the $45 million notes that remain. You can see the principal, the interest rates, the interest cost, and then the total debt service. These notes are callable or eligible for prepayment on April 1 of 2026. The district is able to levy additional funds in this year's levy, set those funds aside in an escrow account to prepay that debt on the call date. So after the defeasance, which is just really a word for prepaying the debt, again, setting funds aside in an escrow for this purpose, what the notes look like after the defeasance, we would start prepaying from the bottom up. So we would be able to, with that additional $5.2 million of Fund 39 levy, pay off the entire 2029 maturity of the 2019 notes, and then a fairly significant portion of the 2028 maturity of those notes. We would be reducing interest costs by $5.9 million. Of course, we would be using $5.2 million to do so. So the net savings associated with just this phase of prepaying referendum debt is over $650,000. So this on top of what the district has already done. The final page of this summary just gives you those steps that we've accomplished thus far. So prepaying a portion of the 2020 notes in 2021 saved interest costs of over $820,000. Refinancing those notes saved nearly $49,000 in interest costs. Prepayment that you did last year saved almost $218,000. And then what is being contemplated for 2023, again, will save a little over $650,000. So in total, once all of that is completed, assuming those funds are levied this year and the debt is repaid as I showed on the previous page, the district would have saved over $1.7 million of interest costs on the referendum debt. And as of that point in time, once those funds are collected and you prepay the debt, you will have repaid 71% of the total 2018 referendum principal. and reduce the amortization from 10 years overall to 9 years. It's actually about 8.5 years. And we just kind of extrapolated this going forward. It's not included in this presentation, but just for your information. Doing this same methodology of this $5 million essentially of Fund 39 levy to prepay that. If you were to do that one more year, you would have nearly all of the debt gone. You would really only have an opportunity to have funds levied in excess of what is due for next year, and then a portion of it the following year. So there's really only 2 more discussions along these lines for this board related to potential repayment of referendum debt in the next couple of years. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Michelle, if we were to move forward with this and we put those monies into escrow, how does that show up on our books? Or does it? Is it it's a balance sheet item, or?
Those, whatever you have provided for in the escrow account, because it is an irrevocable trust, those bonds are legally off your books. So they're legally defeased and no longer show up on your books.
Okay.
In terms of process, that would just come before the board once funds are collected via the tax levy. So you would have another action item if you wanted to proceed with this methodology in the 2023 year. You would have an action item on your board agenda probably in March of 2023 or somewhere in there to actually, accomplish the defeats and set the funds aside into that escrow account.
Appreciate that from a timing perspective. And process. Any other questions similar to what we've done?
So this says 9 years, but if we keep up at this pace, we're looking at a 6-year payback. So our last levy, I think I'm right, Michelle, would be 24, 25 fiscal year. So we're on pace to. The only other thing that I'd speak to, that's savings versus what the rates were when we issued the debt. But I also like measuring what we told the citizens and the taxpayers of our school district, what the interest expense would be. And I can't remember that number off the top of my head, but I'll send out in the Friday update. This is significantly lower than what 2/3 of our community voted yes on. So I think it's an important number as well.
Good piece of news to share.
Yeah, I think it's a
Absolutely.
very good piece of news.
All right, any other questions for Michelle? Well, thank you for all your hard work and PMA's hard work on, working on these matters for us. And we have some good things to talk about potentially in March. So we'll have a decision to make whether we move forward with that or not. So thank you very much for putting this in perspective for us, Michelle.
You bet. Good to see you all.
Yep, thanks, Michelle.
Have a good evening.
Michelle?
Thank you. You too.
All right, moving back to the action items in order. Now we're on item 4. We're looking at our 2022-2023 preliminary budget, and we're also looking at the tax levy. And we do have the preliminary budget at our desk in hard copy. Jen, you want to take it away?
Yeah, I'll walk you through, we're more than happy to answer any questions in the detail. We have the adoption format, which is by fund, but then we supply you with object or source if it's a revenue breakdown by fund as well. So a lot of moving parts. It's been a lengthy discussion and process and some tough decisions between the beginning of the process and where we stand today heading to the budget hearing in September. So I just grabbed a few of the highlights of the budget, and then again, we can answer any questions. I should probably start out by thanking Jess and Heather. Jess became a budget builder all of a sudden, an active participant, and Heather allowed that to happen by taking care of all the audit stuff that's going on in Sherry's absence. So all the good work here is primarily due to them. So the preliminary budget is in full compliance with state-imposed revenue limits. I think that's important to note. It also is the financial measurement of all the decisions the board has made up to this point, meaning employee compensation, wages, or health insurance mainly, any vendor contracts that have been approved. All of that is incorporated into this document, and we are, I think, have a good product to present tonight. So what we're asking tonight, and I sent an email out to the board just kind of outlining, we're asking for approval of this so we can publish it and then present it at the budget hearing in September. We are a unified school district, so the citizenry does not vote. It's not like an annual meeting if you've been in other school districts, but it's their chance to provide some feedback, and as I always say, they can provide feedback to me any time throughout the year on that process. So it will be in the Waukesha Freeman, I believe it's 2 weeks prior to the budget hearing, so you might get some questions as a board about things they might see. And then we have final budget approval come October, end of October actually, so we're several months into our fiscal year before we have final numbers. What's a budget conversation without talking about resident enrollment? So I'll touch on that briefly. This is a snapshot and a snippet out of the revenue limit calculation itself, which is also included towards the back of your budget book. So if you want to see, it's on the left-hand side. But I think this is a really good demonstration of what our enrollment is doing. In 2019, the fall of 2019, we do a third Friday count in September. And that count was 11,915 resident students. That doesn't mean they're necessarily going to our schools because you have open enrollment and you have all the ins and outs. But this is how we measure our revenue authority. So you add in summer school, I think that was our highest year of summer school participation, 12,049. I call them average ADMs, average daily membership, they call it FTE. But you can see in the years that followed, now 2020 would have been the normal count, but summer school was counted after COVID hit. So you can see the drop in summer school from 335 to 119. And then you can see the bounce back that occurred in 2021 with summer school. But the overall total drops from 12,049 to 11,539. So our 3-year rolling average is 11,723. A new line item in there is the independent charter school FTE, and this is similar to what they do with the open enrollment process. They let us levy money so they can send us a bill for the exact same amount. So it's a net zero, but that's the 95.2. So we're guessing that it'll be 95 again next year. The thing that's most critical is the last year of having over 12,000 students counted is going to fall off our 3-year rolling average. So 2019 will be replaced by 2023, which will probably come in around 11,300-ish. So we're going to lose about 700 kids on the 3-year average comparison. So that's just that trend, and I thought it was important to show that. What we talk about in our assumption is in that lower right-hand column, the third Friday count we're assuming will drop by 1.18% from 11,324 to 11,182. To give you some perspective, a little longer term on what our FTE or ADM has been, in 2015-16, our 3-year average was 13,087 students, a 12% drop just in was that 6 or 7 years? So steady, measurable, projected, but obviously when you're multiplying roughly $10,000 per student, to lose that many kids is a significant drop. Now, you're also able to right-size staffing in some areas, but sometimes you can't. But I thought that was important to share.
Yeah, I know we've looked at the data that goes back to even like the 70s, where it looked like we were between 12 and 13,000. It was kind of like this, it was a pretty predictable curve almost. And then, about 10, 12 years ago, it just kept going south, or since 2014, 2015, just kept going south. So we kind of hit that, we went beyond that bottom marker that we had for many, many decades as kind of our low. We never bounced back.
And that, in looking at that history, I'd also suggest that you keep in mind, that was when you had half-day 5K. We now have all-day 5K. We now have 4K. So we've added the scope of counting, and
So it would
still
have
our
been
numbers
exacerbated,
it'd be-
yeah. It would have
it'd
been
be
exacerbated
worse.
without those, yeah. Yes.
Exactly. So we'll talk tax levy first. So we just touched on the loss of resident enrollment at 1.18%, third Friday to third Friday. When we talked about our budget reductions, we talked about how there's no inflationary multiplier for per pupil aid or the student multiplier, the revenue limit in the state budget for next year. The year after that, we'll have a new biennial budget. So we talked about this number a few months ago as we were going through those early budget conversations. We are going to realize a drop of revenue limit authority of $3.4 million. We're assuming no change in the level of state equalization aid from last year. I think that's a pretty conservative approach, but until we figure out exactly what we want to do with the defeasance, I wanted to leave us a little room to not come back with a much higher levy than what we're talking about at the budget hearing. So, but as I mentioned before, we are maintaining the same level of defeasance in Fund 39 as we had in the prior years. So what that ends up meaning, we have a very good levy and rate story for people who want to pay less in taxes. We're looking at a drop of $3.5 million in the total levy. 3.4 of that came from the reduction of the revenue limit. So this isn't financial wizardry on my part or anything like that. It's just the equations playing out. And that actually drops the levy for the second year in a row. But this year we're dropping by nearly 4%. And then the rate follows pace. We have a 4% growth in property valuation, which leads to what we think will be a drop in the tax rate from $7.50 per $1,000 of valuation to $6.92 or 58 cents, which is a 7.68% drop in the rate. So that's the third year in a row that the rates come down, but I put an asterisk next to that because valuation has been growing so fast. The true measure in my mind is levy, and we're on our second year in a row of that. So again, good news. Once we get to this point, this isn't great news when you think of the conversations in March and February that we had to address the $3.4 million loss in revenue limit authority. So again, I think I don't think we'll get a lot of complaints on the taxation part of it based on these numbers.
We always appreciate the valuation going up. I remember when we were, back when it was below zero, and it hit us with the Great Recession. That was kind of us, we always had planned maybe a couple percent increase every year. And then when it went below zero, and sometimes significantly far below zero, but that first year, we were caught off guard. So I appreciate the approach you're taking, Darren, where it's like you're trying to weigh as best as you can. I mean, the crystal ball is never 100% accurate, and I can understand how you want to have a little bit of flexibility in there too. It's good that the property values are working in our favor, though.
Yeah, and we
with
have
respect to the rate.
Again, in the back of the budget book, we have the history of tax rate, levy, and the property valuation. And the 4% is right between the 5 and 10-year average growth rate. And that's kind of how we came up with that numbers. But it's been significant, it's been, last year was 6.8, so, and it has been negative, as you mentioned, for several years in a row. So hopefully we're coming in with a fair estimate. This is the funds just listed, this is our budget adoption format, but it just gives you the total revenues and the total expenditures of each fund. But the other thing that I like about this page is it tells you where our fund balances are and where we think they might end up being. I will preface this by saying we do not have audited statements for July of 2022. This is where we think they're going to come in, so take that. We think we're pretty close, but those numbers will change. The Fund 10 is budgeted at a deficit position, and I'll go through that in detail, and that's all part of a plan, process, and decisions that we've been talking about over the last several months. Fund 21 is all the clubs and all the things. We have a lot, we have a lot of money. It used to be in Fund 70 or 60. Now it got moved there, so we budget as though those groups are going to fully expend, and they never do, but we think that's a safer way to go. Special education always zeroes out because there's a transfer at the end from Fund 10 to 27 to make it break even, so I can tell you every year we're going to really nail that one. The non-referendum debt, that goes back to those energy programs, 14, 15 or so. That's paid off, so that'll actually fall off this year and no longer be seen. It won't be on next year's budget. The maintenance, capital maintenance, is our maintenance budget that we have every year. Fund 43, we will fully expend or have fully expended all the proceeds from the referendum debt, so that there will be no activity in that fund in this fiscal year. Capital expansion is our long-term maintenance fund that we started 6 years ago to address, there was a lot of things talked about at that time, but just long-term maintenance needs that we may want to at least have the resources available to react to. Fund 47 has gone away. That goes back to the Field of Many Dreams, and that's all long gone. Property sales, we've for decades, truly. Anytime we've sold property or had any land transactions, we've always set that aside. The only caveat in there is Express Swim. We have a sinking fund with them as part of their lease. They give us so much money, and it goes into improvements at the pool. That's the $77,000 that we may or may not spend this year. Food service fund, we're still trying to figure out where we're going to end up there. I'm still not convinced there won't be some legislative action. I don't know, but we'll see. And then the community service fund, the biggest expenditure there is half of our SROs are coded to the community service fund. So that's a recap of all the funds. Again, the details in your budget booklet, which is also in board docs for anyone who's listening. Any questions on this slide? So Fund 10, and this is planned on where we're coming out. The deficit budget as it stands today, and remember, we'll come back in October with the final numbers with audited prior year numbers and all that, is $3.2 million in deficit position. And there's three main pieces to that. One is the employee stipends that were approved. We're pulling that out of fund balance. Fund balance became a topic of conversation a few months ago, but if, for those of you who've been on the board a while or who maybe have watched meetings, when COVID started, our goal or the plan that was presented was to save up as much money, so when all the COVID money kind of started dwindling away, that we'd have one-time money to kind of buy some time. So it's not an accident that, in my mind, that we have a higher fund balance, but I do think it's time that we utilize some of it. So we have $1.5 million in employee stipends that the board's already approved. The governor, in December, we received $1.5 million roughly. He had kind of an ESSER pool of money at the state level, and we didn't budget for that. It was mentioned by the governor in July, and you never heard another word about it until maybe Thanksgiving time. So as part of our budget balancing plan is, we are going to use, because all that money on June 30th rolled into fund balance, so we're actually pulling it back out, and that's why it's a deficit. We're going to use half of it in 22, 23, and then half of it in 23, 24 to help balance our budget year to year. So to accomplish that accounting feat, you have to approve a negative budget. And then last item, and this has been around since the late 90s as well, we allow our schools to carry over unused budgets year to year. We're guesstimating that to be $850,000. So that if you add those three numbers up, you come up to very close to that deficit position. So
That carryover is good. Prior to doing that, we made our schools spend whatever they had. So at the end of the year, they'd say, okay, we have this much left, what are we going to spend it on? And that hurt schools, sites that wanted to work on like bigger projects and accumulate money over the course of a number of years. So just a side note there.
And that number's probably a little high, but I wanted to be conservative. Sherry calculates that number, and we'll have that number shortly. But I wanted to have something in the budget so you know, it's what we do, but what the volume of dollars is be. So again, a planned deficit, and one that the stipends are a one-time expenditure. The exposure you have with using the governor's ESSER funds, or maybe they had a different acronym tied to them, but I call them ESSER funds, is that we're funding ongoing costs with that, but we'll tackle that next year as we go forward. One thing that really helped us balance our budget, because we normally project a 5% increase in premiums, was coming up with a plan that allowed us to freeze premiums, or what we call funding rates in self-funded programs like we have, but it equates to a premium, is that the board authorized us to use $750,000 worth of reserves for health claims if needed. If the claims don't come in, our claims have been very good during COVID. You wouldn't think it, but we kept waiting for the wave of claims to come in. I'm not sure that's coming, but this would be only if needed. I didn't budget for the expenditure of these dollars, but it's out there, and I wanted to remind people of that conversation. The other thing that really allowed this conversation and this budget target to be met was the approval by the board to switch our specialty drug program going back to the beginning of last school year, and then the switch of the employee clinic partnership with ProHealth, which saved us $500,000 while providing the same level of service. So all that put together allowed us to freeze premiums for fiscal year 22-23. This is kind of repeat. This is why I wanted Michelle to go in front of us, but we're on pace to pay off that debt for the successful November 2018 referendum in 6 years, and backed down from the original 10 years. So we already had a very aggressive payback plan in place. The vast majority of school districts use 20-year borrows. But you know, we took it another step further, and it looks like as we enter the fourth levy of 6 to make that happen, it looks like we're on our way to accomplishing that, and the rest of it's just kind of repeating what Michelle voiced. Any questions on our debt position? I will say it's pretty rare for a district our size to have as little debt as we have, much less be 2 or 3 years away from being debt-free. So we should pat ourselves on the back for that as well. As I mentioned before, Fund 43, the referendum proceeds were substantially complete. We're going through punch list items, a couple headaches still out there, but overall, the work is all done. And then I plan on bringing a final closeout report to you in fall. So here's the steps moving forward. Unless I hear otherwise, our budget hearing will be on Wednesday, September 14th, right before the Board of Education meeting. On the 16th is the most important fiscal day of the year, and that's the pupil count. And then in October, we just get a wave of information that turns all these assumptions into fact. So we've never, maybe 1 year, especially the big number is the certified aid, so I can finalize the levy. I think 1 year FNF had a special meeting just to make sure that the board was fine with, or the committee was. But other than that, we've usually been pretty close on the prediction, or it's come in better than what was at the budget hearing. And then we just proceeded. I have it in there as October 24th is the final budget. And I'm just following the days that we've used in the past, but it can really be anything in that week span. And then we certify, once the board has approved the tax levy, we certify the levy with the local municipalities. Any questions on any part of the budget or the timeline, or?
That's pretty thorough. You covered it all.
You should have seen the long version. Fantastic. But no, a lot of information here.
Yeah, there are a lot of assumptions that go into this, but based upon past experience and, been through this quite a number of times, and I do appreciate the approach that you take here where, we don't want to have any big surprises come October, and but we still don't have all the data that we need to really wrap this thing up. So, I appreciate where you come in on some of these assumptions, and we'll see where it goes. I mean, the final numbers will always come out in mid-October, so.
They'll be different, but they shouldn't sway one way or the other significantly, right? Aid might come in a little higher, the levy's a little lower, or whatever, but this should be very close.
All right, any other questions or comments? Do you want to ask your question, Ms. Kozlowski?
A quick bridge that you can do outside.
We can talk at the end.
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for your hard work and your team's hard work, Darren, on this. And it sounds like you guys had some new learning to happen on this. So, yeah, we wish all the best to Sherry, and thank you for filling in. There's some pretty important things that she works on, and now you realize how detailed that can be. So, thank you for your hard work in her absence.
So we just need a motion to approve the publishing of the preliminary budget for the budget hearing.
That is correct. This is an action item. If I can get back to where.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Then we'll vote on approving the preliminary budget as presented. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you. I just, a little bit of a technical hiccup here. There we go. All right, moving on to our final action item. We have performance indicators. Each committee's been reviewing their key performance indicators, and there's been some updates to ours, some tweaks, some clarifications, I think. And Darren, do you want to take us through those?
Just getting back.
And each committee is kind of voting on the key, or is, not kind of, are looking at the key performance indicators that impact, their committee closely, and then these all get rolled up to the entire district and will be approved at the full board once each committee has completed their sub KPIs.
So I took from our conversation, feedback we got, and I tried to incorporate what was suggested. So what you have is the revised document, and then below it is what it is, okay? One of the things was we'll pull some of the more detailed information off to the left. First of all, it's easier to read. So I did that with the fund balance, and I tied in not only the total fund balance we have, and again, this is as of June 30th of '21, so once we get the '22 audit, I'll probably just...
Do you want to pop that up?
Yeah, I can share it. So again, I don't picture it coming back to F&F if it's just updating what the fund balance is, but we'll link it to the website, and our financials the last 3 years are always on the website so people can go look. So on the side there, I thought it was important to talk about our fund balance, but also talk about the nature of the fund balance. We, as of '21, had a fund balance of $45.5 million. But some of that is restricted, mainly for our self-funded health insurance program. So our unassigned fund balance is just under $36 million, so I made that clarification. Using what's spelled out in board policy for measuring the percentage of fund balance, because that is important, because everyone you can measure it a lot of different ways. I measure it with Fund 10 and 27, which the policy calls for, but there's that transfer in there which double counts, if you're following my accounting. There's an expenditure in Fund 27, and then I have the exact same expenditure in Fund 10 as I move it over.
Right.
I pull that transfer out. I don't double count that, so it's actually a more conservative calculation of fund balance. So unassigned fund balance, 22.1%. If you go total fund balance, whether it's reserved or not, I thought I should put that number out there too, is 28.2%. And then I have the related links where it'll go out to our webpage where you can see all of our our last 3 years of budget documents and last 3 years of financial audited statements. And then the first bullet's leading off on why do you want fund balance and why is it important. So hopefully that hits on what we're looking for in terms of this item.
Any questions or comments on that KPI? Dr. Piasek?
Thank you. Maybe just a clarification about whether there's a number that we could pull out that is the indicator. I think the KPI should be indicators of health and that we're hitting the targets that we set in terms of operational and outcomes and performance. So having the data is important, and the data looks good. I mean, we're happy about what we have in that unassigned fund balance. But what is the indicator that we're going to leverage?
Our target is in the policy, which I believe states 15 to 25%, and we should have that in here.
Right, I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
and so I would agree that that's the KPI, and then the data that we're showing shows that we're exceeding that.
Yep, yeah.
And it states at 10% the board has to act in it, but 15% is the recommended low, or,
The minimum, yeah.
so I can add that as a KPI and speak to that a little bit and wordsmith that to.
Well, I think what you have here is all relevant. I think the simple KPI, like, for example, in TNL, when we talk about average ACT score, it's one number. So I think having that as the target, that's the KPI.
Yeah, I think just the very first, you could just put it as the first line, right on top of where you have fund balance, Fund 10.
Okay.
Just on top of it,
Left-hand column.
state what our target is, and that we're within it.
Okay.
I mean, you can say exactly what, so you probably want to pull that 22.1 out as that result, so you might want to have the percentage on the left also, so you can see that we hit it. Yes, no? Is that how we're presenting in the other committees? Or KPI in the left and then data in the right?
The KPI is the target. not the actual. That's the goal. So the actual then is measured against that target. The target is what's in policy,
Right.
15%.
Yep.
But we're reporting out the KPIs too in this, or not? Or just stating the KPI?
Right, these are our goals.
Got it.
Okay.
I just have a question.
Yes.
Thank you. So why is it repeated, such as capital plan on the first page and capital plan on the second, bond rating on the first?
The first page is the revised version, the second page is the current version.
Okay.
I
And then,
thought you'd want to see the before and after.
thank you. And then, is there a way that we could put in on the capital plan what we saved as far as what we paid off because of the interest? Or could that go someplace else? I mean, we talk about that, but
Okay?
Dr. Piasek?
Thank you. And if I could just clarify again, we're working on the KPIs, key performance indicators, for the next school year, and as we've talked about with TNL, the next several. So we have goals that we want to either challenge ourselves to achieve or hold ourselves accountable to. So I think the performance to those goals is what we will track, but it won't necessarily be in the document itself. This is a goal-based document. I think to Ms. Robertson's comment, that savings is something that we can measure ourselves.
So that should be reported out.
Correct.
During the year via this committee, as opposed to having the results here. So the KPI document itself doesn't include the actual data, the actual results. It's just, what are our targets? What are our goals? What are we trying to accomplish? And then during the year, the committees are reporting out, saying, for this KPI, here's where we're at. And I would think for those reports, it could maybe take on some format similar to this. Here's our KPI, and then, maybe why it's important, we could remind it, and then results, maybe add a third column of, here's our results.
I would agree.
A suggestion.
I think if we already know the answer, it's not a goal. Because then we're just reporting out on what's already happened. So the intent is to have stretch objectives to improve performance. And I recognize that it's hard in the finance space because we are
We usually
operating
know.
very efficiently, yes, and you kind of know ahead of time what's to be expected.
Yeah, and quite honestly, like in the capital area, I promote the interest savings and what we've done with the borrow and the payback schedule every chance I get, and that might not fit into the KPI perfect framework, but it's such a great talking point to not say it is.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? So I'm trying to walk a balance of promoting what we've accomplished, because we have a lot of wins here. So, yeah, you're right, though. I don't think I can follow the same exact approach to KPI. Not that it has to be significantly different, but my data is a little different. Here's a perfect example. The next one's bond rating. I only go for bond rating when I borrow money. But I love it because it's a third party evaluating our financial situation. So I think it's a great financial report card kind of thing. I think maintaining your bond rating, I think, is the KPI.
That would be an example.
But the data is.
Bond rating of AA or above.
So if you click on bond rating, it goes to our website's under construction, so, but it'll go to the write-up, which is from when we did the first draw of the 2018 referendum, but it is what it is. But maintaining that, to me, is the KPI, right? But just so you know, some of the data, I don't go out and get a bond rating just to say I got one. You know, that's not the purpose of it, so.
But I'm guessing if you really wanted to, you could probably mess it up.
Well, they would. I love the comeback story too, right?
Yeah, we worked hard,
Yeah,
very hard.
we've come a long way in that regard.
If I could maybe just comment further on the capital plan, I understand that the expectation is that work is complete, and then we've got some opportunities to talk about how we pay off that remaining debt, which could have benefit to those folks who are paying for that. And so there is an opportunity. The other thing that's not here is all the conversation that we've been having about the HVAC improvements and that additional contribution, which I know we're still waiting on RFP and additional details. We haven't committed to that, but I think that ongoing investment in our buildings and resources.
I tried to touch on that in the first bullet. Let's see. The district began work on a full facility evaluation for the elementary grade levels, which we did, and identifying building system/safety needs along with a financial plan to fund these improvements. Does that capture what you're, I didn't want to tie the board to HVAC or, because if you'd went to voted yes tonight,
That again is
It
a
was a short KPI,
result,
yeah.
right? So that's something we've done. What was driving us? What is the goal, I guess? What is our capital plan goal is what we need to come up with for the KPI. And it's not even goal, it's truly a key performance indicator. How do we know that our capital plan is healthy? And that we're doing the right things with our capital improvements? Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's really what we're trying to get at. So what do we need to do to stretch ourselves to improve in that area? So what are we looking at to improve in the capital plan area? Again, these are what we've done, is what you've listed. And then-
or are in the process of doing,
Right.
in my mind. And
Yeah.
I'm here to take any, I'm not
You're
married.
all ears, yep.
I know where we want to go, I think. And whether I'm phrasing it right in the KPI, I don't know, but
Well, the HVAC thing could be odd because once that design comes back, we may not do some of it.
well, that's why I hedged the wording, because I didn't want to tie you to.
Because, I mean, once those engineers come back and if it's 10 million, we won't be doing it. I mean, we won't be able to do $10 million worth of project, so.
Or it's reduced down to 3 sites rather than 7,
Right.
or,
So that, I think, would be the tough thing to have the HVAC in here in any sort of specific manner, unless you just want to say. I mean,
Yes, Ms. Kozlowski.
I'm going to go back to where we were the last time we talked about this. And from a financial standpoint, KPIs are numbers. And I think we need to think from 2 different approaches, from a taxpayer approach, from an internal financial approach. The bond rating, I think, is good. The capital plan, it needs to be numerical. How much of our budget are we investing within our capital? What is that goal? How do we want to look at that for the fund balance? Right, we have kind of the lever as to where we need to be within. The bond rating is great to a degree, but what does that tell me? What does that tell me as a taxpayer, as a parent, how we're doing? I care about how are we investing in our capital. I care about how we're investing in our curriculum. I care about what % we allocate to our staff and how are we supporting those that are educating our kids. Taxation is a big one. We definitely want to be competitive, and that is a big part for us, is that I want to be in the top 25% of lowest levy rates. I mean, what is the goal that I'm trying to wage there for? But when I look at financial metrics, I am used to seeing something that I can see numbers. I have a gauge about where I'm looking at it, and I know, in other words, if I'm winning or losing. And right now, I'm still struggling with the verbiage. It's hard to get what my goal is. I mean, I would recommend almost maybe a side workshop just to talk through that, but those are the things I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about, as a district, what am I responsible for? What is a taxpayer? And how am I investing my funds to both move the district, infrastructure, and students forward? And that everything flushes out in the money, right?
The only question I would have is, in terms of, am I winning or losing? There's a million viewpoints out there.
Truth.
So what person am I measuring as the benchmark of a loss versus a win? Because some people, I've had people say, well, why don't you tax us more so we can have X? And then the next person says, well, I don't care if you're at 750. Why aren't we at 350? So I'm not trying to dodge your comments at all. It's just, it's a tough, tell me what room I'm in and I can formulate those things beautifully, but the wide range of opinion. And because you mentioned that last time about more like longitudinal data and more of a dashboard kind of, at least that's what I took from it. And then I started thinking, is that the report out? You know, versus in the KPI, or do we have a financial dashboard on my webpage that provides more of this kind of data that I think that you're looking at in terms of visual graphs and dollars and cents?
I think those are all good things. I mean, because the other piece too is, what's the timeline of your KPI, right? Some of this is an annual number. Some of this could be several years. It's really trying to give a point in time, but if that point in time is not less than a year, what are we measuring ourselves against too? So that, right?
So it looks like we have some work to do here. Yes, Pat?
So what's the KPI and the bond rating? AA?
That's where we are now.
That's where we are now,
Yes.
and that is your key performance indicator, that you maintain that and not go above it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we may have been able to come up with 2 tonight, right?
And like
2 KPIs.
Like capital plan is, I mean, it just says capital plan. That's really not a key performance indicator. Like we used to have a set number. We used to do it for maintenance, where we'd say we're spending $10 million on maintenance this year, or we're going to take the money out of this fund and put it into our maintenance fund, and that was, we did that a lot. I mean, a lot.
Yeah, and then most of those like project dollars or facility improvement dollars are nicely in 41 now, which is
Right.
So it's all in one place. You can turn to the page and see. Then you roll a referendum on top of that, and we'd have to adjust how we display that. But
I mean, the capital plan one's a tough one, because like Carrie said, there's no, I mean, we need a number. Somehow we have to craft something that says, I'm going to meet this number.
at least this number.
At least this number, yeah, because everything else, I mean,
Okay.
the bond rating is set, the percentage of salary and benefits is set, taxation.
A lot of it's formula driven.
Well, I know,
Right.
and I would agree with Carrie that some of this stuff in the capital plan could be 5 years. So, I mean, you could have several different timeframes in that capital plan, which makes this a little sticky. So,
I think we need to talk through these, because just on that one alone,
that one's a tough one.
do you want me to tie future board members' hands a future board who's voting on a budget, do you want to tie them to a KPI? And if the answer to that is yes, that's fine, but to me, that's what we're doing. And that gets to be a little, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you need to know if we're going to talk long-term, my history is when budgets get tight, the first thing that go is maintenance.
Right, it can be a bad thing.
So,
And it was one of the first things to go.
oh yeah, it was always the first, but,
That's where we were down to what, 500,000?
Maintenance is separate from capital improvements.
well, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm talking
There-
projects when I say maintenance.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot to think through.
But I would consider, right, so our top spending, right, is staffing, so the education, infrastructure. How much of so we're going to call out in staffing, we're going to dedicate X percent. Capital plan is the other piece, we're going to dedicate X percent to capital improvements, support, maintenance, wherever it is. But I think if we take a look at the high, what are we investing our money in as a district? There's the top three. And that's really carving that out into this as a goal. I don't know, is it 25% of our budget goes to infrastructure-related costs? I don't have the answer to that.
If it's project-based, you're probably talking less than 2%.
Yeah.
True projects, probably more like 1.
Until we get to a point where we decide to have a referendum. I mean, basically, that's what it is essentially what the revenue limits force you to do is to be as economical as possible, make tough decisions, and there comes a point in time where you're trying to maintain we have 26 buildings or whatever it is, trying to maintain those 26. When I first got on the board, that was $500,000 to maintain.
Joke.
This isn't capital improvements. This is to maintain 26 buildings. How do you do that?
So I would
How do you do that?
encourage us then as a board to get a good look at, post everything we're doing with the HAVAC, what is a true cost of maintenance and capital needs for our buildings? Because going to referendum to ask taxpayers to take on additional pieces when we can try to upfront and budget that accordingly are two separate pieces.
So let's think through that. We asked our constituents for $60 million last time we went to referendum. And, some of those capital improvements are going to last quite a number of years. The safety ones come to mind. They should last decades, really. And, so the tool that is given to us for capital improvements is referendum. So let's say we choose not to do that, not to go to referendum. So now you're going to let's just take 10 years, or even, 20 years that some of these last. So you're at somewhere between $3 and $6 million a year. That will come out of your programs. That will come out of your teachers.
I understand that.
So
When I'm talking about capital plans, right, that's different than I'm building a new pool or a new school. I'm asking us to be wise about how we're budgeting for maintaining what we do have without needing to get to a point where we have neglected it, right?
Sure.
I listen.
So maintenance is different from
Maintenance is
capital
different.
improvements.
But if you don't maintain, now you're in capital improvement.
I agree. Yep. And we've actually tried to attack that, and every time we've tried to attack that, the number is this big, and we can't figure out how to manage it, honestly, how to tackle that. Now, we've had several studies over the years on, what is our true maintenance costs? And really what happens is we have X amount of money, and we figure out the best way to spend it, and there's some projects that you don't need to do right away where you thought you did need to do right away, and that helps out. You're not the first to talk on getting a better plan around our maintenance. And we can work towards that.
I think it's a great KPI. I think there
Yeah,
needs to be a percentage of plan that
Right.
is dedicated to this. What is that percent? That's, I think, where the homework is.
And that was, because, I don't know if it was Lori, but she was tasked with doubling that in a year. And
Yep.
that was one of her, I mean, it wasn't written down, but it was one of her KPIs is to double that maintenance budget to $1 million.
It was a
That's
goal.
always been something
Yeah.
that we have looked at the CFO in doing.
And
Evaluating them.
I'm not discouraging us from, I'm not trying to discourage us from doing this. I'm just maybe shedding some light on, we've tried to tackle this a number of different ways over the years, and we've actually made some improvements. We have that portion of the budget has gone up. I think we have done a better job. Can we do better? Yeah. And I think it's good to know what should that be, and then to set that KPI, and then to shoot for it. I'm all for it.
Just,
Need to wrap our hands around it, though. And there's a little bit to that.
so in 15, 16, and there were some other things going on in terms of coding, so maybe I'll go to 16, 17. That was, 15, 16 was $1.3 million for Fund 41, and that's not all projects.
What was that? I'm sorry.
Just under 1.3 million. In the last 3 years, well, if you count the one that you approved tonight, we're at $3.25 million of, what's that, Fund 40 levy? Yep.
Yeah, we've made some
So we've-
significant strides.
We've just added
Yep.
incrementally. It hasn't been part of a master plan. It's been what we could do in the year that we did it, kind of thing. So, but formalizing that a little bit, I don't.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ever argue against more money for maintenance of our buildings. So,
Well, we have some work to do around this. I don't know, do we have any other specific, if you have a specific KPI to recommend, why don't we get those out now? And then there might be some others that we have to do some work on. But do we have any specific KPIs that have as suggestions? Dr. Piasek.
Thank you. I would like to recommend that the taxation component is maybe something that we watch, but it's not necessarily a target that we can control. It's going to be dependent very much on the revenue limit process. So I think it's a nice thing to report on, but it's not a target necessarily that's in our control. So I would recommend that actually comes off, something to consider. And then the one right above it, which is related to budget associated with staff. I think that's an important one. I think kind of related to the maintenance associated with our many facilities. It's not so much that this is the number that we have to hit. It's that moving in that direction. So if we look at it over the last 5 or 6 years, I think not only it's important that that number remains high, but also, I mean, obviously, I say that also saying that we need to increase the maintenance, right? So there's that balance. But also, I would like to consider maybe for discussion whether what that is made up of, classroom resources versus administrative resources, is something that we could also be looking at. Because I know there are some sweet spots for that, and I actually think as a district, we do quite well in the staffing dollars that we put in the classroom versus administrative.
So we have some work to do.
oh, it's good, though.
What I would suggest is, Darren, you can take the comments, but if, and try and formulate some here, but also if any of the board members, the committee members have specific ideas to reach out to Darren, maybe have some detailed conversation, and that might help him to formulate these a little bit more precisely, and this is new for our committee here. I think it's good to have KPIs, and we'll see where we go, but we have a little bit more work to do, obviously, on this, so. Any other suggestions to talk on this evening, more specific ones? Okay, thanks, everybody, for that. We will continue our work in that area. Moving on to our discussion items, maybe. May I have a hard copy of the agenda, please?
Yeah, the next thing is the budget report.
Thank you.
Next item is the budget report, and we considered the budget document to be our budget report, so there is no, we're in the middle of the audit, so we'll be in next week, right?
Yes.
But ultimately, the audit report won't come to this committee until probably January, because there's always that one report from the retirement system that literally takes months to get before we can close everything out, so. But no, there's no, preliminary work went well, as far as we know. We haven't gotten any questions we couldn't answer, so that's our 2-minute budget report.
Thank you, Darren. And we've already done the referendum debt earlier with Michelle. Moving on to the Richardson lease of Pleasant Hill. Darren?
Yeah, this is more of, they've reached out with a request to extend their lease arrangement of Pleasant Hill. It used to be elementary, but the site, they've been there since, I think, 15, 16, if I remember right, or somewhere in that range. I'm just want to make sure that this committee is interested in hearing or seeing that building leased out again. It's been a great arrangement with us. We get a discounted rate on our students that go there to be served. I think Joe mentioned 14% deduct. Plus we're getting, currently getting over $200,000 in rental income on a building that otherwise would be sitting idle, so I don't see a downside. I think the only thing that we may want to think about, and we don't need an answer tonight, is how long do we want to lease that building for, or what out language we may want. And with Richardson, they're going to want some lead time. They're have to find, if we would move on to a different purpose for that building, they're going to need some lead time to go somewhere, find somewhere to operate. So those are the only issues, but I just want to make sure that me pursuing that is all right, and that we'll bring it back. All right.
Yeah, I think they've been a great tenant, and we've had to have some discussions on the lease and tiring it out to extend it, and I think those discussions have gone well, and I do think that, it is, to be fair to them, that whatever out language needs to give them an appropriate amount of time, but we also need the flexibility to get out too, so I'm sure we can work through that, and appreciate your efforts in that, Darren.
Mm-hmm.
That ends our discussion items. Do we have any recommendations for future agendized items for this committee? All right, seeing none, that will end the open portion of our meeting, but we do have a need to go into executive session. I would be looking for a motion to do so. Pat?
I move to adjourn to executive session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.85, parent 1, parent E, for deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Sale of district property.
Is there a second to that?
Second?
Second by Dr. Piasek, and that requires a roll call vote. Jess?
Dr. Piasek?
Aye.
Mrs. Robertson?
Aye.
Mr. Como?
Aye?
Ms. Kozlowski?
Aye.
Mr. McCaffrey?
Aye.
Okay, thank you everyone for being here this evening. We will not be needing to go into open session after our closed session. So have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.